pointy end. I'm Keith Sutherland. My guest today is Rosemary Glaisher, the Greens endorsed candidate for the federal seat of Bendigo. So welcome.
Thank you very much, Keith.
Now, firstly, tell us a little bit about yourself, because getting involved with politics, or hoping to get involved in politics, is a big thing. So what's your history and what got you involved with the Greens?
Well, I've always been a keen environmentalist. I've always been concerned about human rights. I've been a member of Amnesty International for a long time. And I've tried to act as an individual to do what I can to reduce my carbon footprint, try to write letters to politicians and try and persuade them to change their approaches to things. And I eventually realised that trying to change the world as an individual, although it's important we all try to do that, is really difficult, and I felt that I could achieve more by being part of the Greens. The Greens' policies and philosophies align completely with mine, and I thought that by throwing my weight behind them, I could hopefully achieve more.
And that's probably a very good way to start, because it is very hard and you don't get much reaction as an individual. And I know over the years I've tried to do the same, not that I've got involved in politics, but watch it from the side. The Greens' philosophy, as you said, really much aligns with yourself, but basically the Greens are very big on climate change, and we'll talk about that. Yes. Refugee policy. Is that the areas that you really would like to see change and things happening? And we'll come to some of the things that are going on with the Paris talks, of course. And yes. So, yeah, where do you see some of those major issues from your point of view?
Look, there are so many areas where I'd like to see change, and obviously tackling climate change is incredibly important. Dealing with the appalling situation with our asylum seekers is also incredibly important. However, I think issues like the political funding situation, I think until that is changed, it's going to be very difficult to get the the old political parties acting in the best interests of the electorate rather than being beholden to their corporate donors. So that's an issue I'm quite passionate about. Gambling reform is another one that I think is really important. I think that the damage done by the gambling industry in Australia is just awful, and there's not being enough done about that. Social justice, you know.
Where do you start? Where do you go on that?
Where do you start? Exactly. Look, I could write a thesis on it. But, yep.
Bring it back to some of the issues now. We're in the midst of the Paris climate talks, and we've got 3 days to go. Yep. There's still no resolution. I think there's about 48 items there with asterisks against about 900 items, I believe, that don't have resolution. So where do we go from this? And Australia has gone into it, and I noticed this morning that we are in the third last of the climate change performance. Now, that's an indictment on our government and where we head, that we're in the last 3 of 58 countries. So how do you see that really changing? Because we've gone in there with low targets, 26 to 28% the emissions target from the Liberal National Party. ALP have got 45%. I know the Greens want 100% renewable in a certain time, but have we gone? Have we gone in there just too low? Are we not setting ourselves real high standards? Because we're never going to achieve these things. They talk about, we're in front of this, but you just don't know who to believe anymore.
We went in there relying on the rest of the world doing the heavy lifting, and we've just gone in as, I'd call it carbon bullies, basically. After Kyoto, we asked for special consideration because we're so dependent on coal mining, and we were actually allowed to increase our emissions. Now, we didn't increase them as much as the permission we got, so we've come into Paris with what's called an accounting surplus on our emissions, our carbon emissions. A number of other countries were in a similar position. They have voluntarily forfeited their surplus. Australia refused to do that, which means that we can actually achieve the Liberal Party's targets without decreasing our emissions at all. So when they say that we're going to achieve our targets, that doesn't mean we're actually going to reduce our emissions overall.
So realistically, what's happened, we've had a change of Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull's taken over, and he was certainly in favour of climate change, global warming. We're still going with Tony Abbott's policies. And I'll just get you to comment also about what you thought of Tony Abbott's comments overnight about
Yes.
Islam and all the, he's sort of inciting hatred again,
Yep.
and that's really not a nice thing to do. He's gone to the backbench. He's still obviously making a play for being Prime Minister. But yeah, we've gone in there, as I said, with Tony Abbott's policies on climate change,
Absolutely.
change sceptic, and all of a sudden we haven't progressed under Malcolm Turnbull. It seems to me anyway.
Absolutely. No, we haven't. We're also the only country that argued against banning subsidies for fossil fuel industries. So we've just gone in there as a bit of a wrecking ball, really. So if there's any success out of Paris, it's despite Australia, not because of.
Okay. Bringing some of the issues back to local, because you're obviously standing as for the federal seat of Bendigo,
Yes.
which is not an easy thing because you've got the two mainstream parties, and
That's right.
Lisa Chesters is probably doing a pretty good job out there. We don't know who the endorsed Liberal candidate will be at this point in time.
No.
And obviously you don't go into it just to supply the Greens candidate. You're obviously going in there with a passion to be elected.
Absolutely.
But what do you see are the major issues? And I noticed that you've already mentioned that it's great that we've moved on from the mosque debate. I've heard you say that, and
Yes.
that's a great thing that we have moved on, but I'm not totally sure that we have out there in the community,
Well, I think I
unfortunately.
said I was hoping that we were ready to move on from it. The attempts to overturn the council approval don't seem to be getting very far. And I'd like to think that maybe something positive is going to come out of this. You know, we've had Margot Spalding has been thrown up as a community leader. And really the whole situation has forced us to evaluate where we as Bendigo people stand in regard to people who move into our community. And I think it's made a lot of people realise, once they've thought about it, just how valuable multiculturalism and an injection of new ideas, new people, new culture is in our community. So maybe there is a bright side to this as well. And I think most people realise that in a multicultural society, which we have been ever since it was no longer purely Indigenous Australians, we can't say some people can build places of worship and some people can't. And we have, well, as well as we have the Christian churches, obviously we've got the stupa, the Chinese Joss House, although it's a tourist attraction, is actually used for religious purposes as well. And until the Jewish population dropped, we also had a functioning synagogue. So it seems like, you know, we need a mosque as well. And Shepparton's got 4 mosques. They don't seem to have any problems.
Ballarat's got their own, and one's going to be built there as well. But you're right about that, because people tend to forget all the other churches and no objection to any of them, basically. And all of a sudden, because someone wants to build a mosque in Bendigo, we've got this, and it's created hatred. I know that there is a groundswell of opinion in Bendigo, but it was unfortunately the people coming from out of Bendigo that caused a lot of the angst and publicity, bad publicity, and it's great that Margot Spalding was able to reverse that with that Australian Story program. So full marks to her and all that we believe in Bendigo.
Wonderful.
Is there other issues that you believe in that should be on the forefront, something on a local basis that, rather than the mainstream things that we've talked about, that you think needs change? Yes,
I think that we take our forest for granted a bit. We live in some of the last box ironbark forest in the world, and it's under threat, I think, from a lot of different small factors, and that includes inappropriate development, particularly outside the town boundaries. So, you know, clearing for housing, which is sometimes put forward. Inappropriate road development, excessive road development, which I think we're perhaps seeing down in Ravenswood. And also, I'm hoping this is going to change, but the 5% target of planned burns, which I'm not against planned burns in order to protect people and protect property, but when the rules were brought in about this 5% across the state, they were never intended to be across the state. They were only ever intended by the people who suggested them for the Royal Commission to be for specific areas and as an experiment. And because the feeling seems to be there that it has to be 5% of the state burned, naturally the easiest bits and the least politically difficult bits will get burned. And that's often forest, which is just habitat, but it isn't near people's houses because there's no one there to object, but also it's not actually doing any good. So it would be good to see that change.
And we saw some of those problems and consequence to that at Lansfield earlier,
exactly.
A couple of months ago. So
yes,
yeah,
although that was apparently near houses, although maybe it got away.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, now I believe that you were inspired to stand after you went along to the Bendigo Writers Festival, which is an amazing event for Bendigo, listening to Bob Brown. So he inspired you. What was it that he inspired you and made you think, I want to do more, I want to stand for the Greens?
Well, he talked about exactly the things that bother me, and he talked about asylum seekers as well. You know, he's not just an environmentalist. He really is right along my lines. And he made the point, which I thought was really interesting. He talked about asylum seekers and the dreadful things that are happening to these people, these innocent people. And he said, you know, close on 90% of the population voted for those policies, because if you voted for Labor or Liberal, you're voting for those policies. And he talked about the other things, the whaling, the destruction of the Tarkine, climate change, so on and so forth, all the things that worry me, and said that it's very easy to get depressed about these things, and that he had an extended period of depression, partly because of just thinking too much about what's going on in the world. And he said that he eventually realised that the only way to avoid falling into that pit of depression is to stop mulling things over and to get up and do something about it, do everything you can about it. And I realised then that just spoke to me. And it was around about that time that I was approached and asked whether I'd consider standing for the Greens. And I think if I hadn't heard Bob Brown, I would have said, oh no, I'm too shy, that sounds too hard, you know, someone else can do that. But I was really inspired to think, no, it's not about me. Everybody has to do whatever they can to try and change the things they believe are wrong.
So it hit a trigger with you, and there was a passion, a point from that, and I'm sure that Bob Brown can trigger that in a lot of people, because
he
and
does.
A lot of us sit back and say, well, yeah, okay, so what? And I guess that we are bombarded by the mainstream media with all this negativity.
Yes.
No wonder there is an increase in depression and all the other problems that are associated with that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's incredible. Finally, the election may be called in April, depending on whether Malcolm Turnbull's popularity is starting to wane. It's starting already, because there's been a few things happening. Also, the other thing is, do they really want to go to a budget in May? Because there's a lot of issues out there, and the budget is blown out enormously under Abbott. And also it's probably got to continue on, because there's no turning back. Like a steam train, you just don't stop it so quickly. Or alternatively, it'll be October, which is what Malcolm Turnbull's preferred. He's suggesting. We're not sure. So there's a long time between, well, April and probably October. So you've got a lot of work ahead of you for the next few months to get your name out, to get your people to know who you are, and obviously what you stand for on a local basis.
Exactly, yes. And that was another reason why I felt that I should agree to do this, is because I'm now semi-retired. I have far fewer obligations than I used to, and I really can throw myself into this for as long as it takes. I can make time to meet as many people as possible. We're hoping to have a little office, at least for the last few weeks of the campaign, where I'll be available to speak to anybody who wants to talk to me, ask me questions, tell me what they think I should be looking into.
So you're going to do a listening post, just like Lisa Chester's, and listen to people's values. So, well, Rosemary, good luck with the next few months of your campaigning. Obviously, it's a big thing, but it's good to have someone that's really passionate about the environment, refugees, and all the things that really do matter. And I think that Kevin Rudd was right in saying that climate change is probably the moral thing that would challenge of our time.
Absolutely.
Even though he dropped the ball and didn't go to the double dissolution, which he should have done, and all these things would have been history by now. But anyway, that's not the case. So good luck. Thank you for appearing on the Pointy End today.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Keith. It's been a pleasure.